Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to do the Honeycomb Brioche Stitch in two colors. This is the more advanced version. There's also a simpler version that I've provided a separate video on, and the link is in the description field. This one is more advanced because it uses brioche style knitting. I've also provided links in the description field to my brioche scarf, the one color brioche scarf, as well as the two color brioche knitting pattern. And so you're welcome to go and try that if you just want to learn about brioche knitting. But this honeycomb brioche will use a couple of those brioche stitches, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. But I'm using this pattern right now to knit up this scarf here. I think that's the best way to learn a pattern, is just knit up a project with it, maybe a scarf or a cowl, or maybe even something bigger like a shawl. It gives a fabric that's really nice and squishy, and you can see it's pretty thick. I'm knitting with these yarns here, and I've provided a detailed pattern of the stitch itself as well as the yarns that I'm using for this scarf. Now this is still a work in progress. I'm a little over 2 feet on this. I think I have enough yarn in those skeins to complete a 5-foot long scarf. So with one skein each, I think I can get that. And this is the right side, this is the wrong side. And with this more advanced honeycomb brioche, the way the pattern falls out is that one color, which you designate as your main color, will end up on this outer edge as the outside shell of the honeycomb pattern itself. And then the darker color, or the one you designate as your contrasting color, will end up in the background. So it gives a very nice look. If you do the simpler version of the honeycomb brioche, then it's actually going to look something like this. So it is a very different look to do the simpler version, and you can check that out in that other video. Personally, I like this version better, so this is why I did my scarf I'm doing my scarf in this version. So let me show you how that works. But before I do that, one last point. You'll notice that in this pattern, the sides are actually just forming in one color, and that's specifically because we slip stitches in one row and we knit them in the other row when we are in this color. So I'll show you that in just a minute, but just wanted to point that out. The pattern gives a very pretty edge, I think, and the wrong side doesn't look too bad either. So let's get started. Now, to knit the honeycomb brioche in this style, with this brioche style type knitting, you will need double pointed needles. If your project is small enough that your stitches will fit on a shorter needle, you could use these smaller double pointed needles, or you might want to use a circular needle, because you do have to move the stitches from one end to the other as the pattern goes. Now you do need an odd number of stitches, so I have cast on 9 stitches right here. Any style of cast on is fine. And for my demonstration, this lighter color is my main color, and then this darker brown color is my contrasting color. What I found was having the main color to be a lighter shade gave a better pattern, or a better look, to have the lighter color form that outside shell. But it's your own personal choice. You can certainly flip them and use the darker color as your main color, and vice versa. Okay, now you do have to do a setup row, which you only have to do one time. So you're going to cast on in the main color, and then you're going to do the setup row also in the main color. And for the setup row, you're going to knit one, then you're going to bring the yarn forward like that, and then you're going to slip the next stitch. So you're inserting it as if to purl and just pulling it over without doing anything to it. Now you'll notice that the yarn is in the front. That's going to be your repeat throughout the row. So you're going to knit one. Notice when you do that, you're going to create this double stitch, or this funky looking stitch that we designate as the brioche stitch. In brioche knitting, we count this as one stitch, okay? So knit, bring the yarn forward, and slip. Knit, yarn forward, slip, knit, yarn forward, slip. And you'll keep doing that till you get to the last stitch. And when you get to the last stitch, you're just gonna knit it. So we're gonna knit that, and that's the setup row. You only do that once, and then you turn the work. And now the pattern itself is a 4-row repeat. And the 4 rows are going to be row 1 in the contrasting color, row 2 in the main color, row 3 in the contrasting, and then row 4 in the main. So let's start with row 1. You're going to take your contrasting color, leave about a 4-inch tail, and make a loop like that. And the pattern will tell you that the very first stitch, you're just going to slip. So insert your needle as if to purl and just bring the stitch over. Now it's going to be a little bit loose like that. You can tug on this yarn here to tighten it up. And now comes the slightly tricky part. You'll notice that this brioche stitch, this funky stitch that we created from that setup row, what you want to do is you want to knit the stitch and not the loopy part. So this part here, this little loop here, that's the looped over yarn, or that's the one that formed when we brought the yarn forward. And so we're going to ignore that or move that to the side, and we're going to insert our needle into the actual stitch itself, and we're going to knit it with the contrasting yarn. So take your yarn, put it around that and knit that stitch. Then you're going to toss that stitch just like a regular knit. And now this looped over bit of that brioche stitch is still there. We're just going to slip that. Okay, so that's what you do to the first brioche stitch. Then the second stitch is just a regular stitch. You're going to knit that. And that is your repeat throughout the row. So every time you come to that brioche stitch, you move the looped yarn away, insert into the actual paired stitch, knit it, and then slip. And then knit the next stitch. Now one little shortcut here that you can do, and I discovered this after having knit a few rows of this, is that you can move that looped thing away, insert, knit, and then as you're bringing this yarn out of the knit, you can pretty much bring it out through this looped stitch as well, and then toss both of them out. So that's just a shortcut way of doing it. You certainly don't have to do it that way. You could do it individually by knitting the stitch first, dropping it off, then slipping it. And so you keep doing that until the last two stitches. The last two stitches, you're going to do what we just did here, because it's a brioche stitch. And then the very last stitch, we're just going to slip. So you're going to insert as if to purl and just bring it over. So you'll notice that the first stitch and the last stitch still remain in the main color because we slipped them. And this is how we get that pretty pattern. We actually don't introduce that contrasting color at all in those stitches, so we get a pretty pattern. Okay, so after you've done row 1, a pretty edge I should say. After you've done row 1, do not turn your work. Slide your stitches to this end, and now you're going to do row 2. Now for row 2, you're going to use the main yarn, which is already there, and the pattern is you knit the first stitch. Move that away. You knit the first stitch, then you're going to purl the next stitch, which happens to be this brioche stitch. So we're going to do a brioche purl, which means you're going to bring the yarn forward and insert into the entire stitch, into both loops of that stitch, purl it, and then drop both loops. That's a brioche purl or a burp, BRP. Then your yarn is still in the front. For the next stitch, you're going to slip it and then bring the yarn all the way around that right needle. So we're doing a yarn over. And that's your repeat, a burp, slip, yarn over, okay? So burp, slip, yarn over. Until you come to the last two stitches. The second to last stitch is a brioche stitch. We're going to purl that. We're going to burp it. And then the last stitch, we're actually going to knit. So take the yarn to the back to be able to knit it. And that's row 2 complete. And you'll notice now that both your yarns are on the same end of the double pointed needle. That's your cue to turn the work. So at the end of row 2, you're going to turn the work. Now row 3, you're going to knit again with the contrasting color, and you're going to slip that first stitch without doing anything to it. Again, tug on the yarn to tighten it up a little bit. And then the pattern will tell you to purl one stitch. It's a regular stitch. We're just going to do a regular purl. And now we come to that brioche stitch again. This time, the loopy part of the brioche stitch, which is this lighter colored one right here, we're just going to slip it. So insert as if to slip and just slip that part. And then the actual stitch part, we're going to purl. Okay? And that's your repeat. Purl 1, then slip the brioche yarn over part and purl the actual stitch. Purl one, slip, purl. And you'll do that until you come to the last two stitches, which you're going to purl one, and then the last stitch, remember, we're just going to slip it. So rows 1 and rows 3, the first and last stitch are just slipped. Again, at the end of row 3, do not turn your work, bring it all the way over to the other end, because now you're going to do the last row, which is row 4. And for row 4, you're going to knit 1, then you're going to bring the yarn forward, then you're going to slip the next stitch, just insert purlwise and bring it over. And now your yarn is in the front, which is where you want it to be. Your next stitch is a brioche stitch, and we're going to knit that. We're going to do a brioche knit or a bark. So insert your needle into both loops and knit it, and you're going to drop both loops. That's a brioche knit or a bark. And that's your repeat. Yarn to the front, slip, brioche knit. Yarn to the front, slip, brioche knit. You're going to keep doing that until the last two stitches. The second to last stitch, yarn to the front, slip, and your last stitch, you're just going to knit. So take the yarn to the back and knit it. And that's row 4. You can pull on the yarn a little bit here to tighten it. And again, both your yarns are at the same end, which is the cue to turn the work. And now you've completed rows 1 through 4. You're going to keep repeating rows 1 through 4 using that same color sequence to be able to then get a pattern that's going to start looking like this. And so I do hope you give this one a try. It may feel a little bit slow when you first start knitting. Each 4-row repeat is going to pretty much give you about a part about this big. Now, I've provided details for my scarf here, which I believe is about 7 inches or so wide. But if you're unsure and you get the yarn that you want and you want to try it out, I would suggest casting on a small number of stitches. Remember, it has to be an odd number, so you can pick 9 stitches or 11 stitches. Cast those and just make a small swatch of the pattern, like I did here first when I was trying to figure out the gauge for this yarn. You can make a small swatch like that, and let's say you've knit 13 stitches and it's given you a width of about 3 inches or 4 inches. You can then use that. So if 13 inches has given you a width of about 4 inches, then if you wanted a scarf that's maybe 8 inches long, you're going to multiply the 13 by 2 to get 26. So a little bit of math involved there, but that's how you can figure out the gauge to pick your size of needles and your size of yarn, make a small little swatch. And the work lays pretty flat, so I don't think you necessarily need to even block your work before trying and figuring out what the gauge might be. So you're certainly welcome to get the same yarn and try it with the size needles that I'm using. I'm using size 8 needles for this, but I just hope you give this one a try because I think it's a lot of fun to knit. If, however, you want to try the simpler pattern, then do check out the link in the description field. And as always, thank you so much for watching my knitting videos. And if you like it, please click the like button, subscribe to my channel for all upcoming videos, and click on the little the bell icon so that you get my notifications of my videos. I'm going to try and post a video each week, and this week it's actually a buy one get one. You're getting 2 videos, the advanced and the simpler version. Thank you as always, and happy knitting.